Hello and welcome to today's podcast, Success on the Sound Book Launch. I'm Christine Siegel. I'm the provost here at Fairfield University, and we are so pleased as Fairfield enters its 82nd year to be launching the first ever history of our institution. Whether you're an alumni of Fairfield, somebody in the local area, a listener who's interested in Catholic education, or just someone interested in history in general, we're so pleased to have you join us today, and we hope you not only listen to the podcast, but also read the book. The book, entitled Success on the Sound, recounts Fairfield's history from its founding in 1942 up to and including really present day, and it recounts the people who contributed to Fairfield's growth and success as the students who came here, and the reflections of those who were part of this really amazing project in Jesuit Catholic higher education. For today's podcast, we have an interview with our three authors, moderated by the Dean of our library, Christina McGowan. In so many ways, as you will hear, this book is a work of our university archives, which are housed in our library. And actually, university history and archives of the university are part of the strategic vision and trajectory for our university library. And so it is so appropriate that the Dean of our libraries is moderating our discussion with our authors. Likewise, equally appropriate, the first author of the book is Elise Bashinsky, who is our university archivist and special collections librarian since 2003. She is a certified archivist with a BA in anthropology from New York University and an MS from Southern Connecticut State University. She also studied acting at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art in London and the National Shakespeare Conservatory in New York City. Elise is joined in her authorship by two of our most distinguished professors emeriti here at Fairfield University. Professor Emeritus Paul Lakeland, PhD, served as the Aloysius P. Kelly S.J. Chair of Catholic Studies and was the founding director of Fairfield Center for Catholic Studies. Professor Lakeland retired in 2023 after 42 years of service at Fairfield. A distinguished scholar and author of 10 books, his academic research interests include the Catholic Church, the papacy, religion and literature, and the relations between the religious commitment and the progressive politics. He's a member of Phi Beta Kappa, the Catholic Theological Society of America, and the American Theological Association. And our final author, also Professor Emeritus Kurt Schlichting, PhD, was a member of the Fairfield class of 1970. He taught at Fairfield from 1974 until his retirement in 2018, serving on the faculty for 44 years. During his time, he was also the Gerald Corrigan 63 Chair in Humanities and Social Science, a member of Phi Beta Kappa. Dr. Schlichting received his MA and his PhD from New York University, and he is the author of 3 books. Dr. Schlichting's research on Grand Central Terminal laid the groundwork for the award-winning PBS American Experience documentary, Grand Central. These 3 distinguished authors will talk in today's podcast about their time working on the book together, what they found most interesting and most illuminating as they researched the history of Fairfield University. I encourage you to really relax and enjoy the conversation with Dean McGowan and our 3 authors today.
Thank you all for your efforts in bringing this book, and with it, Fairfield University's history to light. Could any of you or all of you tell us a bit about how this book came about and what brought the 3 of you together?
Well, one afternoon, actually, I get a call from President von Arc's office, and his secretary or his assistant said, well, he'd like to talk with you. And I looked around and I thought to myself, well, what's going to happen? And I came into his office, and I had published a book about Grand Central Terminal. And he had that on his desk, and then on the coffee table, we sit down, and on the coffee table, he has this 2-volume history of Georgetown. I mean, it must have weighed 20 pounds, right? And he said, well, this is interesting. He said, do you think you could do a history of Fairfield? And I thought about it. I said, let me get back to you. And that's where it began. And one of the first things I did was the Jesuits had moved their national archives to a beautiful building on the St. Louis University campus. So I flew out to out to St. Louis, and I went to the archives. And lo and behold, there were these detailed archives of the university, dating back to the early 50s for the university. And I thought, this is interesting. And I found some of the material interesting and some of the material we used in the book. So that's my beginning of the adventure.
I think the second step was that I was asked to teach a course for the 75th anniversary of the founding of the university. And I wanted to bring in a couple of other people to give guest lectures, basically. And Kurt was one of them. So that was the point at which I think I said to Kurt, we could do this. And he said, well, I'm already doing it. And then we realized that, 4 hands are better than 2.
Yes.
And we got to work on it. And we found ourselves, of course, turning to the university archivist for a certain amount of information, because that's what archivists do. And one day I said to Kurt, Kurt, one of the big things in this book is going to be the arrival of coeducation. And we're just 2 old white guys doing this book.
That's right.
Maybe we should see if our university archivist would like to join us in this.
In this adventure.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's exactly right. I was brought in by Paul and Kurt ostensibly as the university archivist to write about women on campus. And it was really great the way we came together as a team. It was like we were characters in some kind of cosplay where we each brought special skills to the project. And I was the archivist, and I had the dusty books and the ancient scrolls, and I was keeper of the ghosts, and my weapons were research and knowledge. And Paul, being a former Jesuit, with his gray beard and Oxford education and sardonic turn of phrase, was like a monk warrior. He had a sword of justice, and you were instrumental in writing about Fairfield's mission in the book and our Jesuit legacy. And then Kurt, who looks a little like he could come from Middle Earth, but you're the data guy.
I'm the data guy.
You're the data nerd. You are responsible for all the charts and tables in the book.
Well, that's what I did at Fairfield. I was in the sociology department and teaching statistics and research methods. But the data is interesting because it really does confirm the success of this institution. When you look at, for example, the endowment, there was no endowment when I first went on in the faculty, and now I think there was an endowment last week. I hope it's still there, but it's quite substantial.
I think it is, and I think you make a good point because you're really the heart and soul of the book, because one of the things we talk about is the way that a Fairfield education empowered immigrant students and their families to have better careers, better lives.
That's right.
And you, that's really your story, Kurt. You are the living embodiment of that kind of success.
Also, the only one of the 3 of us who ever studied at Fairfield.
I did.
It's true.
I did. And the earliest classes, at first the prep and then the university, came from the city of Bridgeport and the ethnic neighborhoods that filled that city. And the people who lived there were Catholics coming from Italy and Poland and Czechoslovakia and Ireland. And that's our first students. And they're important. And then I think we still do that today, by the way. I think so.
Well, I think we do that particularly on the Bellarmine campus, which is drawing students, some of whom probably live in the same streets that those first Fairfield students lived in.
I think they do.
That's great. Well, thank you. Great story about the 3 of you getting together. and about hearing about that book in President von Ark's office. So, Kurt, you talked about this a bit, but when I was reading the foreword to the book, President Nemec spoke about how establishing a university in 1942, just 3 months after the attack on Pearl Harbor, was a bold move. So could you share some of the reasons why the Jesuits were so determined to open up a high school and college in this particular area during that particular time?
Well, first of all, the New England Jesuits in the 1930s had a large number of men who came every year to enter the Jesuits, and to perhaps their mission was to teach. And the New England province already had 2 institutions, Boston College and Holy Cross. And so then what coincides with that is Connecticut was one diocese, and it was the Hartford Diocese. And there was Bishop McAuliffe. And the Jesuits got in touch with Bishop McAuliffe, and they asked if they could come down and establish a high school, a prep. And so it was fortuitous. The Jesuits had dedicated men, and the bishop wanted to have another high school. And then the Catholics who lived in this area thought they were shortchanged by the diocese up in Hartford. And so the Jesuits write back to the bishop, and then the bishop writes a formal letter inviting them to come here and to start a prep and a college. And so it's fortuitous. It all comes together, and then the Jesuits set out trying to find a place to establish this college. Where are they going to build this?
And what we have never finally been able to figure out is whether the subtext about opening this new institution is that they had too many priests for the works that they had. So we've got all these young men trained to teach. We'd better open another school. Now, we don't know for sure that's the case, but at least one of us suspects that's the case.
That's what Father Allen said at one point. They ran out of jobs for the Jesuits, so we opened another school.
That's great. So any of you can answer this, or all of you at different times. Tell us about an individual who had a major impact on the university's success or trajectory that maybe our listeners do not know about or have heard of.
Can I start? Okay.
Please do.
Father Bill McGinnis was the president of Fairfield University from 1964 to 1973. He hadn't been a president before. He was working at Boston College, and after Fairfield, he went on to be president of St. Ignatius in San Francisco. During his 9 years, and he sort of said this himself, and he wasn't terribly polite about it, the institution went from being a very small, insignificant, rather insular place to having the components that would grow into the present place. So he created a board of trustees, or rather he nudged the Jesuits aside, because in 1964, all of the trustees were Jesuits, and almost all were Jesuits teaching on the campus. Not so healthy. He created what we would know today as a board of trustees. He presided over the separate incorporation of the college from the religious order that had founded it. And, of course, he opened the door to coeducation. He also was the only president, I think, who was, in the same year, was given an award by the students. He had the Yearbook Award and appeared at a student demonstration in effigy as a pig's head on a stick.
That's a contentious figure. That's a mover and a shaker for sure. Yes.
I think one of the most an influential person was Father Christopher Mooney, and I apologize for not knowing exactly the years, But Chris Mooney had a vision. And for example, he was, I think, the impetus for the university trying to find if we could have a Phi Beta Kappa chapter. And Chris epitomized for me basically a newer Jesuit. He had multiple degrees. He had a law degree. He had a PhD. He was the associate dean of the Pennsylvania University Law School. And then he came to Fairfield. And his vision was that we needed to, I don't know the right word, but we needed to have a focus on academic work and to build the reputation of the university. He encouraged us to do research and to go to whatever your academic conference was and give papers. And I think he was a great guy on top of everything.
Yeah, this is a tough one because it's hard to just choose one. There's so many people, so many folks who have contributed so much over the years. So I picked at random some people I thought were important. Dee Lipman, who was a professor at the School of Nursing. She was an Army nurse during the Vietnam War, and during her time at Fairfield, she was instrumental in getting approval and funding for the Vietnam Women's Memorial, which is that statue you can see now in the National Mall when you go down to Washington, D.C. I would probably choose from my research Larry Mazin, who was for over 27 years, at least 27 years, the head of every iteration of what I think is now the Office of Student Diversity Programs and Multicultural Affairs. And he must have contributed a great deal and had a great impact working with students over the years. And I would also like to shout out for Joan Overfield, the first dean of the library, and James Estrada, the university librarian, because they were the ones who initiated the first digitization projects at the library over 20 years ago, which now we're continuing. And they hired me, so I thought that was pretty impactful.
Love that answer.
Sure,
Kurt.
Can I just add another name?
I know, it's hard to just choose one, isn't it?
Yeah.
John Barone. He came here. It was a small institution, and he had a vision. He had a vision that we could be much more than that. And he dedicated his entire life to this institution, and he got things done. Now, when the first buildings, Xavier, are done in a collegiate Gothic kind of building with all this decoration, then when John Barone wants to build Campion, and the Jesuits say, well, you can't have this dedication. So John just used bricks. He just did bricks. And when he built the faculty office building, when we finally got into the door, it was the cement blocks painted white. And so at a faculty meeting, someone says, John, where's the wallboard? That cost a lot of money. We just got to get this thing going. It was like that for everything. But he really contributed.
He was a great man who did mysteriously. He worked. I remember taking him to lunch one day with a colleague, John Thiel, and once he realized we weren't looking for anything, he told all sorts of stories, and I swear every story ended with the phrase, and we did it in the dead of night.
Well, sometimes it takes somebody like that to push things through, and we've named the campus center after him, so it must be important.
Yeah.
So, Elise, I'm going to turn this to you. So, in May 2024, as you know, we commemorated the 50th reunion of the first class of women who received their undergraduate degree at Fairfield University. Could you share a bit about this history and how we commemorated the milestone?
Sure. Well, I hope to some degree we've commemorated it in the book. One of the great things about this project is that we actually got to interview many of the women who were part of that first class. And when they arrived on campus in 1970, they were excited about being on campus. Some of them were away from home for the first time, and they knew, I think, that they were part of something special. But there were sticking points. Despite the fact that the university did everything it could to upgrade the living facilities, it was, as Kurt just said, basically cinder blocks. There wasn't enough closet space. There's never enough closet space. And there were still some urinals in the bathrooms. There were also other barriers that needed to be overcome. There was some initial resistance from some of the Jesuit faculty. And during the discussions of coeducation that went on campus among the all-male student body, at one point they voted down coeducation 2-1 in a student poll. But the women rose to the challenge. And it was great talking to them, hearing their memories. These are women they're vibrant, they're strong-willed, they're smart, they contribute to their community, they give back in so many ways. And they were real trailblazers during their time at Fairfield University. So I can only hope that we've honored their legacy to a certain extent by sharing a glimpse of that history in the book.
Thank you. So this is again I'd love for all three of you to answer this. What was one of the most surprising things you discovered while you were doing your research for this book?
Well, there are many possibilities. The one that sticks in my mind is that I discovered early on, reading some of the early material that Kurt mostly focused on in the book, that the original objective, the original imagination of the first president and the second president of the university was to build, and I quote, the Notre Dame of the East. And when you look at the book, if you look at the end paper inside the front cover, you see a very detailed depiction, architect's drawing, of what they were planning for before the cinder block era interrupted their plans. And you can compare it with the end paper at the back of the book, which shows pretty much where we are now. In some ways they're similar, and in some ways they're very different. But that struck me, that they are... We're into the Second World War. Pearl Harbor has just happened, and they want to make the Notre Dame of the East. And all they had was a big open space and a couple of pokey little buildings.
That's right. Didn't they call it a parking lot surrounded, by a campus or something like that at a certain point?
2 buildings surrounded by a huge parking lot.
That was it.
That
was it. And they said, yes, that was embarrassing. Go ahead, Chris.
I think I knew the Jesuits were hierarchical, but I really didn't realize how deep that was. So when the first presidents come, they write letters back to the provincial of the New England province. And it may be something very, very important. We need to borrow money to have another building built. And then it perhaps would say, Father Murphy's mother in Boston isn't well. Can he go home for the weekend? And then it was, as Paul was talking about, the makeup of the original, we would call today trustees, they were all Jesuits. And then sometimes when there was a big decision to be made, they didn't meet. And what was important was what the president wrote to the provincial, and then what the provincial wrote to Rome, to the Jesuits in Rome. That's how it worked. To borrow money, you had to convince the provincial, and then you had the right to the Jesuits' order in Rome. And that surprised me. And then when the first accreditations are done, the people doing the accreditation come and say, well, wait a minute now. You're telling us that the trustees are Jesuits, that the president's a Jesuit, all the senior officers are Jesuits, all the department chairmen are Jesuits? That's not the way an institution a modern institution should run.
Right. Well, this is the thing, and I think you probably will expect this, that I get surprised all the time. One of the interesting things that happens during some of this kind of research is that you realize that there every building, every space on campus has some kind of memory or significance associated with it. So I had one student tell me that one of his favorite memories of Fairfield was sitting on the back steps of the PepsiCo Theater after a show, talking to his director, Marty LaMonaco, smoking cigarettes and looking at the stars and talking about life. And then I'll get an email I got an email from a couple who were married looking for pictures of the Stagger Inn, which we talk about in the book. It was the first bar on campus. And the reason was because it was the 70s, late 70s. There was a big snowstorm. They were stuck on campus. They went to the bar, and that's where they first met. And, it's these kind of stories, these kinds of surprises. Some of them are in the book, some of them aren't, that make this kind of research rewarding. And it never ceases to amaze me.
Thank you. So, Paul, you all end the book with the chapter entitled Fairfield University 2023, A Walking Examen. For those who are not familiar, the Walking Examen is a mile-long prayer and meditation trail on our campus, which was installed in 2023. I know you use the examen as a metaphor to reflect on the challenges of the university's future, our achievements, and our possibilities. Would you like to share some of your reflections in regard to this? And again, we'll start with Paul, but we can also open this up.
Well, as you say, we use it metaphorically predominantly, but the reality of it says something about the institution too. The reality. So we use it because it's a nice, convenient way of talking about the various buildings, especially the newer construction, and we have some beautiful pictures to show to people who may not have been near the campus in the last 50 years. But the very idea of the examen is, people don't always understand what it is. But in the Jesuit tradition, the examen is something that you engage in every day, not to sort of beat your chest about how horrible you've been or anything like that. The examen is something where you evaluate how the good spirits, the grace of God, or whatever you want to call it, has worked with you each day. And the more that people can do that, the more hopeful is the future of the institution. That's my reflection on the walking examen.
I think I can give that an amen. Yeah.
Okay. Great.
I thought you were going to say an A+.
That's where I thought she was going to.
A+ works for me. Why don't you go, Kurt? It's all right.
Yeah, I think the idea of sitting in a moment during a day and thinking about where you are and how you got there and where your dreams will be or want to be, I think that's important.
Yeah, in a way, I have absolutely no right to weigh in on this question. I'm neither Jesuit nor Catholic, and I didn't go to this school, and it's a bizarre situation for me to be in charge of the history of a place like this. But in the last 20 years since I've been here, my feelings about something like the Walking Examen and the mission have changed from being fairly oblivious to it to now realizing that it is, as Paul rightly says, it is essential. I think it gives the soul to the university. It makes us special. It makes us who we are. However, people individually engage with that. And I went around and took pictures of the stones, and it really was quite an interesting exercise. And I happened to choose a beautiful day when I did that, and it's a beautiful campus, but I recommend it. I think it's an interesting exercise.
Thank you. I did see those. I did see your photos in there. The photos are beautiful, all in there. It's really amazing to just look through the whole book and read it. I thank you all so very, very much for this time. And we're going to turn it over to Christine Siegel, our provost. But thank you again very much. This was a great conversation.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks.
Thanks.
It's been fun.
I hope you enjoyed today's conversation with Dean Christina McGowan, as well as our authors, Elise Baczynski, Paul Lakeland, and Kurt Schlichting. More importantly, I hope you go out and purchase the book and read it. It really is an excellent volume that recounts our history. Current President Mark Nemec encourages you in reading this elegant volume to keep in mind that while times change and structures sometimes change with them, the underlying moral and educational purpose of our work at Fairfield University remains faithful to the founding vision of Ignatius. This book is a work of fine scholarship, buttressed by the genuine affection for our home here in the city of Fairfield and our extended works across our nation and the globe. I encourage you to read it with pride in Fairfield's noble past and well-grounded hope for its exceptional future. I join President Nemec in those sentiments in encouraging you to read the book with both pride and hope for Fairfield University. One of the most interesting things about this book is its title, Success on the Sound. As you heard from our authors, much of the research and the data that they uncovered accounts for and it contributes to that success. At the same time, I'd be remiss if I didn't recognize that our success continues to be a work in progress and that success is never finished. And to close, I'd leave you with the words of Thomas J. Fitzpatrick, S.J., also inscribed in the beginning of the book, that reminds us a Jesuit university is a work in progress. It is never a finished project. And indeed, when we turn to the dedication of this book, on behalf of the authors, I'd like to share that the book is dedicated to the great cloud of witnesses who have gone before us, faculty, students, staff, and administrators who have made Fairfield University what it is today.